When I think about summers, most kids imagine beaches, popsicles, and endless sleepovers with friends. Me, I always thought of my grandma's farm, a place where time seemed stuck in the 1970s. The air smelled like hay and old wood, and the loudest sound was the creak of the back porch swing. Every year since I was 8, my mom would pack my suitcase, toss it into the back of our dented old Honda, and drive me 3 hours into the middle of nowhere. She always called it family time, but really, it felt like exile. There was no Wi-Fi, no cable, and the nearest store was 20 minutes away. My friends back home spent their summers at the mall or pool parties. I spent mine feeding chickens and swatting mosquitoes the size of grapes. Grandma June was kind enough, but she wasn't the warm, cookie-baking grandma you see in movies. She was practical, efficient. Sometimes I wondered if she even liked having me there. She never hugged much, never told long bedtime stories. She just kept busy, always up at dawn, her hair pinned in a tight bun, moving from one chore to the next like she was trying to outrun something. And Mom? She never stayed more than a night. She'd drop me off, give Grandma a quick, awkward kiss on the cheek, and disappear back to the city. It was like she couldn't get away fast enough. I'd asked her about it once when I was 12. Why don't you stay? Don't you miss her? Her hands tightened on the steering wheel. I come when I can, Lily. Her tone made it clear I shouldn't ask again. That summer, the summer everything changed. I was 16. I'd planned to get a part-time job at a smoothie shop with my best friend, Chloe. We were going to make money, buy cute clothes, maybe even save up for a road trip. But when Mom announced I'd be spending 3 whole months at Grandma's again, I lost it. 3 months? Are you serious? Mom, I can't. I'll lose my job. Chloe will. This isn't up for debate, she interrupted, shoving clothes into my suitcase like she was in a hurry. You'll be fine. It's good for you to get away from distractions. Distractions? She meant my friends, my phone, my entire life. I sulked the whole ride there, earphones in, ignoring her attempts at small talk. When we pulled into the gravel driveway, the sight was exactly the same. The faded red barn leaning slightly to the left, the windmill creaking, the front porch lined with flower pots that hadn't been watered in weeks. Grandma was on the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. She didn't wave. She never did. Mom barely turned off the engine before grabbing her purse. Be good, Lily, she said, kissing my forehead quickly, like she was afraid of lingering. Then she was gone. The first week was exactly as I expected. Chores, heat, boredom. I helped feed the chickens in the morning, swept the porch, read old magazines in the afternoon. My only escape was the attic, where a tiny window overlooked the back pasture. I'd sit there for hours, daydreaming about home. It was during one of those long, restless afternoons that I first noticed the barn. I mean, I'd always noticed it. It was impossible to miss. But that day, something felt different. The big double doors were slightly open, just enough for a strip of sunlight to spill onto the dirt. Curiosity got the better of me. I slipped on my sneakers and made my way across the yard. Inside, the barn smelled like hay, dust, and something faintly metallic. Old farming tools hung on the walls, and wooden crates were stacked in one corner. I wandered between them, dragging my fingers over the rough wood, when I saw it tucked behind a pile of feed bags, half hidden under a tarp. A trunk. It was old, the kind you see in antique shops, with brass edges and a heavy padlock. The dark wood was scratched, and a faded travel sticker on the side read Chicago 1979. My fingers itched to open it, but the padlock was solid and rusted shut. I don't know why, but the sight of it sent a strange shiver through me, like it didn't belong there, like it was hiding something. That night, over dinner, I asked Grandma about it. "There's an old trunk in the barn. What's in it?" She froze for just a fraction of a second before answering. "Just junk. Things that should have been thrown out years ago. Can I look inside?" "No," she said, sharper than I expected. Then she softened. "It's locked anyway. Best to leave it be." But the way she avoided my eyes told me there was more to it. The next day, I went back when she was out in the garden. I knelt beside the trunk, running my fingers over the lock. It was old, but I'd seen enough YouTube videos to know how people got these open without a key. Not that I was about to break into it. Yet, that night, as I lay in bed listening to the crickets, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Why would Grandma keep a locked trunk in a barn if it was just junk? Why did she react like that when I asked? And why, in all these years, had my mom never mentioned it? I didn't know it yet, but opening that trunk would tear open a wound that had been hidden for decades. A wound that would change the way I saw my family and myself forever. The next few days on the farm dragged by in that slow, heavy-way summer days do when there's nothing to look forward to. But no matter how many chickens I fed or weeds I pulled, my mind kept circling back to that trunk in the barn. It was ridiculous, really. It could have been full of old winter coats or rusted tools. But the way Grandma had shut me down, the way her voice had gone tight, it made me feel like there was something important inside, something she didn't want me to see. One afternoon, I went into the barn under the pretense of looking for more chicken feed. My sneakers crunched over the hay-strewn floor as I approached the corner where the trunk sat. I crouched down and examined the lock again. The brass was dull, mottled with spots of green where the metal had aged. I tried pulling it. No luck. I tried pushing the latch. Nothing. My fingers itched with frustration. I wasn't the type to snoop, but I also wasn't the type to let a mystery sit unsolved right in front of me. Then I remembered the drawer in Grandma's kitchen. She had this big, cluttered drawer under the phone where she tossed everything: rubber bands, batteries, loose change, and keys. Dozens of random keys that probably belonged to locks long gone. The opportunity came later that day. Grandma was out hanging laundry on the far clothesline, and the kitchen was empty. I opened the drawer and started rummaging, my heart thumping in my ears. Most of the keys were small house keys, car keys. But at the back, under a roll of masking tape, I found it, a large, old-fashioned key with a rounded bow and a tarnished silver shaft. It looked exactly like something that would fit the trunk's lock. I hesitated. If I took it and Grandma noticed, she'd know I was up to something. But the urge to know the truth was stronger than the fear of getting caught. I slid it into my pocket, forcing myself to act casual as I grabbed a glass of water and headed outside. That evening, I waited until the sun dipped low enough that the barn was cloaked in shadows. Grandma had gone inside to watch her nightly news show. I slipped out the back door, my sneakers silent on the dirt path. When I reached the trunk, my hands were trembling. I pulled out the key and slid it into the lock. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a slow, reluctant click, it turned. The lock fell open. I lifted the heavy lid, the hinges groaning in protest. A cloud of dust rose up, stinging my nose. Inside were layers of folded fabric, old quilts and clothes that smelled faintly of cedar and something older, deeper. I pushed them aside, my pulse quickening. Beneath the fabric was a stack of yellowed envelopes tied together with twine. The handwriting on them was neat but firm, each one addressed to June Carter, my grandma, from someone named Samuel Gray. I didn't recognize the name. I untied the bundle and pulled out the top letter. The paper was thin, the ink faded, but the words leapt off the page. June, I can't stop thinking about that night. I wish things had gone differently, but you have to understand, I had no choice. If she ever finds out the truth, it will destroy her. Please, for her sake, keep this between us. I read it twice, my heart racing. Who was she? My mom? Someone else? And what truth was so terrible it had to be kept hidden for decades? The next letter was dated a few months later. June. I heard she's doing well in school. I'm glad. I wish I could be there for her, but that's not possible. You promised to protect her from all this. Don't let her find out. Not now. Not ever. My stomach nodded. The her in these letters had to be my mom. But why would someone, possibly a man, be writing to Grandma about protecting my mom from the truth? And why had I never heard of a Samuel Gray? As I kept reading, the letters became more emotional, more desperate. He wrote about missing, seeing her grow up, about regretting that night, over and over. The last letter in the bundle stopped me cold. June, if she asks questions, tell her I'm dead. It's better that way. She'll never forgive me otherwise. I sat there in the dim barn, the letters trembling in my hands. Dead? Who was this man to my mom? Why would she need to forgive him? And then it hit me like a punch to the chest. He could be my mom's father, my grandfather, the one she never talked about, the one I'd never met. But if he was my grandfather, why had she told me he died when she was a teenager? And why was Grandma hiding his letters in a locked trunk in the barn? I quickly bundled the letters back together and buried them under the quilts, closing the trunk as quietly as possible. I slid the lock back on, but didn't click it shut, just in case I needed to get back in. The key burned like a secret in my pocket. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the old farmhouse made me flinch, half convinced Grandma somehow knew I'd been snooping. But the bigger fear was the questions that now filled my head. Who was Samuel Gray really? What happened that night? And what truth could destroy my mom if she ever found out? By morning, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't leaving that farm until I had answers.
The morning after I found the letters, the air in the farmhouse felt heavier, like the walls knew what I'd done. I kept glancing at Grandma over breakfast, wondering if she could somehow see it on my face. The fact that I'd pried into her past, cracked open a locked piece of her life she clearly wanted shut. She didn't seem any different. She buttered her toast, sipped her coffee, and reminded me to collect eggs before the sun got too high. But every word she spoke now had a shadow to it. I tried to act normal, but my brain wouldn't stop replaying the letters. Tell her I'm dead. She'll never forgive me otherwise. If Samuel Gray was my mom's father, that meant he was my grandfather. And my mom thought, no, she knew, he was dead. Which meant Grandma had lied to her. Why? After breakfast, I grabbed the basket for the eggs and headed toward the chicken co-op. But instead of going straight there, I detoured behind the barn where Grandma couldn't see me from the kitchen window. I pulled out my phone, the one I had to hide because Grandma claimed screens rot your brain, and typed Samuel Gray Chicago into the search bar. The signal was so weak it took forever to load, but when it finally did, I scrolled through pages of results. Nothing matched. No obituaries, no news articles, no family records that I could access without paying. It was like he didn't exist. I was so focused that I didn't hear the back door creak open. Lily! Grandma's voice carried across the yard. What are you doing back there? My stomach lurched. I shoved my phone in my pocket and called back. Just checking something on the tractor. She gave a slow, skeptical nod but didn't push further. That night, lying in bed, I made a decision. I'd try to get her to talk. Not directly, because if I mentioned the trunk she'd know I'd snooped. But maybe I could ease into it, drop questions about the past and see if she slipped up. The opportunity came 2 days later. A thunderstorm rolled in, trapping us inside. The rain battered the windows, and the smell of fresh coffee filled the kitchen. Grandma was making her famous vegetable soup, the kind that simmered all afternoon. I sat at the table, peeling potatoes, trying to sound casual. What was Mom like when she was my age? Grandma paused mid-chop. Your mother? Yeah. Was she into sports? Music? Boys? I gave a little laugh, hoping to make it seem harmless. She looked down at the carrots she was slicing. She was quiet, kept to herself. That's it. No funny stories? No big adventures? Grandma's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Your mother didn't need adventures. She had responsibilities. It was such a strange thing to say that I forgot to keep peeling. Responsibilities? At 16? Her eyes flicked up to mine, sharp and assessing, before she returned to her chopping. Some people have to grow up sooner than others, Lily. The way she said it made goosebumps rise on my arms. It wasn't just a statement, it was a warning. I decided to push just a little. Did she ever? I don't know. Talk about her dad? The knife stopped mid-slice. She didn't look up. Why are you asking about that? I shrugged quickly, trying to look innocent. Just curious. She never mentions him. I don't even know what he looked like. Grandma's hand tightened around the knife handle. For a second, I thought she was going to tell me something. Instead, she said, "Some people aren't worth remembering." Then she changed the subject so abruptly it felt like a door slamming shut. Go check the laundry. I think the rain might be getting in. That night, the storm kept me awake. I lay there, listening to the wind rattle the windows, my mind racing. Whatever had happened between my mom and her father, Grandma wasn't just avoiding the topic, she was actively burying it. The next morning, I decided to take another look at the letters. If I couldn't get answers from her directly, I'd have to piece together the truth myself. I waited until she was in town buying feed. Then I slipped into the barn, my pulse quick and jittery. I opened the trunk, the smell of cedar and dust enveloping me again. I went through the letters more slowly this time, looking for clues. One of the earlier ones mentioned a place I drove past Miller's Bridge last night. It hasn't changed since that summer. Miller's Bridge. I didn't know it, but maybe it was nearby. Maybe it was connected to that night he kept referring to. Another letter, dated almost a year later, was more emotional than the rest. June. I saw her today. She was at the market with you. She looked right at me, but didn't know who I was. I wanted to say something, God. I wanted to, but I know I can't. You're right. It would only make things harder for her. Reading that made my chest tighten. My mom had been in the same place as her father and hadn't even recognized him. And Grandma had kept it from her. I was tucking the letters back when I heard it, the barn door creaking open. Lily? My blood ran cold. It was Grandma. I shoved the letters under the quilts and slammed the trunk shut just as she stepped inside. She looked at me for a long moment, her eyes narrowing. What are you doing out here? I forced a shaky smile. Looking for a rake. Thought I'd help clear the garden path. Her gaze lingered on me, sharp and knowing, but she didn't call me out. Instead, she simply said, "Don't be messing around in here. There's things that aren't meant to be disturbed." Her voice was calm, but it carried a weight that made my skin prickle. She turned and walked out, the sound of her boots fading into the rain-soaked yard. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. She knew I was lying. And I knew, without a doubt, that the truth about my family was buried deep in this farm, and she was guarding it like her life depended on it. I couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. Not in the dramatic, end-of-the-world sense, but in the way you know a secret can only stay buried so long before someone decides to shut you up for good. Grandma had eyes everywhere. She didn't need to catch me red-handed. She could smell a lie like smoke. But that only made me more determined to find out what happened between my mom, Samuel Gray, and that night. The only concrete clue I had was Miller's Bridge. I'd never heard of it before, so I waited until the next morning when Grandma went to the front field to repair a fence. I pulled out my phone and typed Miller's Bridge near Carter County into the search bar. After a painfully slow load, a single photo appeared, a small, weathered wooden bridge over a narrow river about 20 minutes away. It looked unremarkable, the kind of place no one would notice unless they were looking for it. I decided I had to see it. The problem? I didn't have a car, and even if I did, Grandma would never let me go exploring. But there was an old blue bike leaning against the shed, one I'd used years ago before I was too old for childish things. The tires were flat, but after 15 minutes with the air pump, they held enough air to get me where I needed to go. I told Grandma I was riding into town for ice cream. She didn't like the idea, but didn't stop me, and I took the long way, following the dirt roads until the GPS on my phone led me to a faded sign, Miller's Bridge 2 miles. When I got there, the place was almost eerily quiet. The water below rippled lazily, dragonflies darting over the surface. The wooden planks creaked under my feet as I stepped onto the bridge. It felt wrong. Not in an obvious way, but in that strange, heavy way a place can feel when it's witnessed something bad. I leaned against the railing, wondering what Samuel had meant when he wrote, "It hasn't changed since that summer." My phone barely had a signal, but I tried searching Miller's Bridge accident anyway. After a long pause, a handful of old newspaper clippings popped up. One headline from 1984 made my stomach drop. Local teen injured in late night incident at Miller's Bridge, second person fled scene. The article was short. Apparently, a girl named Evelyn Carter had been found on the bridge with a head injury. She was taken to the hospital and recovered, but the other person involved was never identified. Evelyn Carter. Carter was my family's last name. And 1984. That was around the time my mom would have been a teenager. I stood frozen, the summer air suddenly thick and suffocating. Could Evelyn have been my mom? If so, what had happened that night, and was Samuel Gray the second person who fled? I pulled out my phone again, snapping a photo of the article so I could study it later. I was just about to leave when I noticed something carved into the railing, faint, worn down by years of weather. 2 sets of initials, SG plus MC enclosed in a heart. SG. Samuel Gray. But who was MC? I was still staring at it when a voice behind me made me jump. "Not much to see here, is there?" I spun around. An older man in a baseball cap stood a few feet away, holding a fishing rod. His face was weathered, but his eyes were sharp. Yeah, just out for a bike ride," I said quickly. He stepped closer, squinting at me. "You look familiar. You June's granddaughter?" My mouth went dry. "Yeah, I'm Lily." He gave a slow nod. "Haven't seen her in years." "Not since. Well, not since before she stopped coming around here." He glanced out over the water. "This bridge has seen its share of trouble. Folks still talk about that night." I forced my voice to sound casual. "What night?" He looked at me like I should know. "Back in the 80s. Girl got hurt. Real bad. They said she fell, but..." He lowered his voice. "Some say she was pushed. Fella with her ran off and never came back." My hands gripped the railing. "Do they know who he was?" He shook his head slowly. "Not for sure. But some folks had their suspicions. June never would talk about it. Neither would Evelyn." There it was again, Evelyn. Before I could ask more, his attention shifted to the river. "Well, I'll let you get back to your ride." He walked past me, his boots thudding softly against the planks. I stood there a moment longer, staring down at the water. If my mom was Evelyn Carter, and if she was the girl who'd been hurt that night, then Samuel Gray might have been there. He might have been the one who ran. Which meant the letters in the trunk weren't just from a long-lost grandfather. They were from someone who'd been hiding from her for decades. When I got back to the farm, Grandma was on the porch, arms crossed. "Where have you been?" "Just took a long ride," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Her eyes narrowed. "Long enough to get yourself into trouble?" I shook my head, forcing a small smile. "No trouble." But as I climbed the stairs to my room, I could feel her watching me. She knew. Not exactly what I'd done, but that I was getting closer. And for the first time, I wondered if finding the truth was worth the cost. Because I was starting to think that cost might be my relationship with both my mom and my grandma, maybe forever. I didn't sleep much after visiting Miller's Bridge. The carved initials, the fishing man's words, the old newspaper clipping, they all looped in my head like a song I couldn't turn off. The more I thought about it, the more certain I became. Evelyn Carter was my mom. And if she was the girl from that article, then whatever happened that night had defined her whole life and shaped the way she raised me. The problem was, Grandma was standing between me and the truth. And she wasn't just a little protective. She was guarding it like her life depended on it. 2 nights later, I decided I couldn't wait any longer. I had to know. The house was quiet except for the slow tick of the kitchen clock. I crept down the stairs, the old wood groaning under my weight, and slipped out the back door. The barn loomed in the moonlight, a shadow against the pale grass. Inside, the air was cool and heavy with the smell of hay. I crossed to the trunk, unlocked it with the key I'd stolen, and pulled out the letters again. I read them by flashlight, searching for anything I'd missed. And there it was, in one of the earliest letters, a single line I'd skimmed over before. I'm sorry for what happened on that bridge. I swear I didn't mean for her to fall. My chest tightened. It was the closest thing to a confession I'd seen. Samuel had been there. He'd seen my mom fall, or maybe he'd caused it. And afterward, he'd run. I didn't hear Grandma come in until her voice cut through the darkness. Put those back. I froze. She was standing in the barn doorway, her face shadowed but her eyes glinting in the beam of my flashlight. Now, she said, stepping closer. I set the letters down slowly. You lied to us. You told Mom he was dead. Her jaw tightened. He is dead. To us. That's not the same thing. My voice shook. Why didn't you tell her? Why didn't you tell me? She sighed, the sound heavy and tired. Because the truth doesn't always set people free, Lily. Sometimes it breaks them. I stepped forward. Was she the girl from Miller's Bridge? Was she Evelyn? Grandma's silence was all the answer I needed. I pushed harder. What happened that night? Her eyes drifted away, her voice dropping to a near whisper. Your mother was in love with Samuel. They were young, stupid, thought they were invincible. But he was trouble. Always chasing some thrill, always pulling her into things she had no business doing. She swallowed hard. That night, they argued. He'd been drinking. She tried to walk away, but he followed her onto the bridge. She slipped, hit her head on the railing. He panicked and ran, left her there in the dark. The image hit me like a punch. My mom, lying alone on the cold wooden planks, bleeding, calling for help that didn't come. He came to me the next day. Grandma went on. Begged me not to tell her he'd been there. Said it was an accident, but I didn't care. I told him if he cared about her at all, he'd leave. And he did. I shook my head, anger burning through my chest. So instead of letting her decide if she wanted to forgive him, you just erased him from her life? You lied to her for decades. Her voice hardened. I protected her. If she'd known he was still out there, she would have gone looking for him. And I wasn't about to let her ruin her life for a man who abandoned her. My voice cracked. You didn't protect her. You decided for her. And now she spent her whole life believing a lie. Her face was unreadable. Sometimes lies are kinder than the truth. I couldn't take it. I stormed past her, the letters clutched in my fist. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had the right to tell my mom what I'd learned. The next morning, I made the call. She picked up on the third ring. Lily? Is everything okay? I hesitated. Mom, I found something. At the farm. There was a pause. What do you mean? I found letters. From Samuel Gray. Silence. Then, so quietly I almost didn't hear it. Where did you hear that name? I told her everything. The trunk, the bridge, the article, the confession in his letter. I braced myself for her to yell, to hang up, to tell me I didn't know what I was talking about. But she didn't. When she finally spoke, her voice was trembling. I always wondered, if it was really an accident. But she told me he was gone. I believed her. I let myself believe it because it was easier than thinking he chose to leave. "I'm sorry, Mom," I whispered. "No," she said, her voice steadier now. "I'm glad you told me. I deserve to know." She didn't come to the farm that day, or the next. But a week later, she showed up, her eyes red but her head held high. She and Grandma went into the kitchen and closed the door. I sat in the living room, hearing only the rise and fall of their voices, sharp, then quiet, then sharp again. When they finally came out, neither looked at me. But as Mom took my hand and led me to the car, I knew something had shifted. Grandma stood on the porch, watching us drive away. She didn't wave. In the weeks that followed, Mom told me more about her teenage years, the parts she'd kept locked away. She never said whether she forgave her mother. I'm not sure she ever will. But I do know this. The truth didn't destroy us. It hurt, yes. It changed things. But it also gave us something we'd never had before, honesty. And as for the farm, I haven't been back since that summer. But sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see that old trunk in the barn. I see the initials carved into the bridge. And I wonder how many other families are living under lies, thinking they're being protected, when really, they're just being kept in the dark.